And then start on the back road to my right. Tyrone Nelson, I'm like, okay. Javier Henrico.
Clark Smith, Chesterfield County.
Dave Anderson, Chesterfield.
Jim Engel, Chesterfield.
Alan Robertson, City of Richmond.
Bonnie Ashley, General Counsel.
Lincoln Saunders, City of Richmond.
Cheryl Adams, GRTC.
Boris Wilson, GRTC.
Tyrone Award, Clark, City of Richmond. Jana Smith, Assistant GRTC.
Henry Vanden, Communication Specialist, GRTC.
On a very recommended. So the federal organization that is policy GRTC.
All right, thank you. Public comments.
Just my spiel for the afternoon time frame. The public notice, meeting agenda, and agenda attachments for this October 12th, 2023 special meeting of the boards of GRTC, RideFinders, and Old Dominion Transit Management Company were posted on October 2nd, 2023 at RideFinders.com. Per the meeting notice, all written comments were received by me prior to 5 p.m. yesterday preceding this meeting and were provided to the members of the board this morning. They are now read during the public comment period by staff following the 2-minute speaking limit and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Also, per the meeting notice, this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. For this meeting, I have received 9 public comments in writing. They are: Joy Robinson says, the 2B needs to run on a more regular basis. I'm late for work a lot of times because the bus I need to catch can't come. Please fix it. Ed Wren says, 91, consistently late, no show when others are on time. Mason Manley says, thank you to GRTC for reinstating the Riders Advisory Council. It makes me happy to see that GRTC cares so much about involving its riders in decision-making and listening to their voices. That being said, I think in spirit of making new decision-making tool and advisory body as helpful and useful as possible, GRTC must extend the application deadline. Bus riders are inherently very busy, not always internet connected, and have limited capacity to complete applications on a day-to-day basis. Please extend the application deadline additional 2 weeks to allow for a total of application process. Monica Freeman says, I think your submission policy was too short for allowing the best pool of applicants to apply. To be fair, once you would extend the submission deadline, I really appreciate it. Kimberly Denmark says, my name is Kimberly Denmark. I am a resident of Richmond's 5th District and a regular GRTC bus rider. I want to thank GRTC for the opportunity afforded bus riders to work with GRTC in developing a strong public transit system for the Richmond area by giving us the opportunity to serve on the Riders Advisory Council. However, I am concerned that the application process prevented or at least significantly hindered the fullest possible representation of GRTC riders. I was surprised to see that the application period for RAC was less than 2 weeks long. I don't believe this was long enough to give people significant time to consider their involvement and then to apply. Along these lines, I doubt individuals who chose to print their application and mail it to GRTC will get it on time. My final conclusion is in regards to advertising. I noticed the information about RAC in the Henrico Citizen and on GRTC's website, but nowhere else. Surely this lack of visibility negatively affected how applicants GRTC received. Therefore, I would ask GRTC to extend the application period for RAC. When doing so, please consider accessibility to the application by making it available in a variety of formats, not just online, and encourage more media outlets to advertise the opportunity. There are very simple steps GRTC can take to ensure that RAC truly represents the different voices and perspectives of bus riders. Thank you for your time and efforts. Laura Blackwell says, I want to comment to bring forth the issue of the deadline for the Rider Advisory Council applications, as well as hope for an extension. As someone who applied for the council, I want to make sure the riders are given the opportunity to have their voices heard. However, a lot of that starts with adequate advertising to ensure those who want to apply have the time to do so. The application was only available for a short time, 10 days, with little to no promotion, making it difficult for GRTC passengers to learn about the opportunity. It was only made available due to the knowledge of a current graduate of Mobility University who themselves were very knowledgeable about GRTC. Not all riders are. Because of that, they weren't sure where to look and why they should be looking at all. I would like the council to have a wider pool of advocates to create more pool diversity to make sure that video travel users have time to submit an application. This starts with increasing rack visibility. Thank you so much for your time. Dave Harris says, please extend the period of applications to the rack so that those who want to apply have time to do so. And that might be the end of the rack ones. Angie, hello, my name is Angie. I take the 7 a.m. 7B most of the time to go to the doctor's appointment for my kids, do grocery shopping, and get back and forth to work. For the bus to come every 30 minutes would be beneficial to myself because I'm trying to start a new job at Amazon, just because right now I can't get the shift that I need with my kids because the bus comes every hour. So that prevents me from being able to get a better job to support my family. If the bus came every 30 minutes, it would change anything for me. Everything, my apologies. From Amanda Nunez, hello, my name is Amanda Nunez. The reason I would like the bus to go out to Chesterfield is because my parents live out there. They actually live over there off of Rovis, so it's kind of hard for me to visit my parents if I got to take the bus. They don't really come out because of COVID, so that's why I would like to see buses go out to Chesterfield. That doesn't really cover comments submitted to me. I was made aware that there are members of the public that wish to submit comments, so Mr. Chair.
That was a lot of reading.
My name is Molly Brennan, and I live in the north side. This is my first one. I would like to ask for more frequent bus service on Route 91, which is the Wilburn connector. One of my fellow transit enthusiasts said, though, that might be happening anyways, but right now the bus comes every hour, which makes it very challenging to plan. I don't rely on the bus to get to work, but many of my neighbors do, and having it come every 15 or 30 minutes would give us all more options. I'd love to be able to take the bus to my school, to my CA, to the library, but in order to get to an activity like soccer practice, which is actually happening today, it's only a mile away, but we'd have to leave about 40 minutes early. So having a more frequent bus on the Burnham would make traveling along our busy car-centered corridor easier and safer for all our residents.
Okay.
My name is Richard Bourdin. I live in the Manchester area. I know the fact that I have easier access to bus service on Wall Street, Commerce and Maury. And even though I rode the service on almost the entire area, I see the missing piece of Williamsburg Road, which the 4A and 4B should go to, which should access the residents in those Heights and Darbytown to and that way, 2 to 3 hours. 10 to 15 minutes.
Any other public comments? All right, thank you guys for being here and sharing your thoughts. Definitely take those under advisement. We did not have a quorum at our September meeting, so we could not adopt the meeting note, the minute meetings in order we wrote. So playing some catch up. That's why we're here today. Can I get a motion to approve the August 15th meeting?
So moved. Second.
All right, motion made in second. Any questions, comments, concerns? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Same for the September board meeting minutes.
Second.
All right, made in second. Questions? Comments? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, consent agenda. Now, did they update us on this stuff last meeting?
They did not, you asked if
Okay.
there were any questions, and questions.
All right, so, well, I guess we've been sitting with this now for 2 months, right? Yes. So do we have any questions about the office space utilization or stormwater management services contract or Title VI analysis of the September service charges? Anybody have any questions for Mr. Wilkins, Mr. Byrd, or Ms. Ross? If not, can we get a motion to accept the consent?
So moved.
Motion made, second. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we do have 2 action items. Pulse expansion, north-south project update. I see Ms. Torres, but there's not Ms. Torres up there. So,
Just say no. Thank you, members of the board. I'm going to apologize real quickly about my voice. I will try to keep it going, but it's a little hoarse. I want to talk today a little bit about the study we did to determine a potential locally preferred alternative for the north-south GRTC. So this is about we've worked on this about 10 months so far, so I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. As you can see on the agenda, it's really chronological and kind of how we started the process sort of at a higher level, then ended up sort of here. So I want to emphasize that this is just the first part of the process. There are many more steps to come, which I will go over shortly. But we did do a fair amount of analysis in order to get from sort of this high level universal alternatives down to a locally preferred alternative. So the reasons for this project are pretty straightforward, but there is a growing interest in a BRT connection north and south of the river, going across the river and then crossing the existing BRT on Broad Street. So we want to look at connecting more neighborhoods, connecting more jobs, and then connecting more kind of centers of activity, especially on the south side that may not have access to that higher frequency, higher capacity transit. And then look to see how those improvements on BRT echo and kind of go throughout the entire system. So those improvements would improve local service and then other services that GRTC offers as well. Obviously, like I said, expanding access is a big piece of this, equitable and direct access, making those connections across the river that bus for right now, and then increasing transit ridership frequency and reliability, not just on BRT, but system-wide. And then, of course, finally, just supporting the economic development goals of the city of Richmond and Henrico and Chesterfield counties as we go through. So that came into play, of course, in the analysis. So just kind of where we started when we began this, we had 4 corridors that were prescribed to us by GRTC in the study. Wanted to look at US 1 North, US 1 South, basically going from Virginia Center Commons down to just past RiChMOND Community College, and then headed out 360 and 60 to 288 basically on both sides. So huge corridors, very long, kind of a lot of area. And then of course what you see is we get downtown, you have a lot of different options you can go. So that's that bridge crossing, the kind of route through downtown was a big piece of this as well. So we focused in on 3 bridges, the US 1 bridge, the Manchester Bridge on 9th, and then the Mayo Bridge 14th to do the analysis. So there are those natural choke points, but really, north and south of the river, there are a lot of options to kind of go, turns to be made. But it was our goal to tease out those different options, figure out what was most effective and efficient. So when we did this, we started off on a higher level, sort of a mix between qualitative and quantitative analysis to determine of all those different segments, which are the ones that were sort of the best performers, so to speak. And where we started is defining those segments. So we broke the roads up into the corridors up into smaller sections. Some were a couple of blocks, others were larger than that based on kind of the geography and the development patterns. And then we went through this analysis, and you can see in the green boxes at the bottom, they sort of fall into 3 different categories: land use and demographic analysis, with the transit connectivity with the existing network, and also planned services. Then we looked at multimodal connectivity. That included bike facilities in the corridor, sidewalks, crosswalk infrastructure, and things like that. So there are a bunch of different items that we sort of looked at all kind of separately, and then we assigned grades to each of the segments based on each of these metrics. And then what you ended up seeing, what you ended up seeing is that you get this schematic. Now, I think keep in mind this doesn't follow rows necessarily, it's much more of a direction out, sort of kind of showing you how the potential route would go. But each of these different segments got a grade on those 3 different categories that I mentioned earlier. So the takeaway is to really look and see where you see the darker colors. The darker blues, the darker grays, and darker greens all correspond to better performing segments based on the metrics that I mentioned on the previous slide. So as you move further out on these different corridors, you you get a lot, kind of that performance starts to fail. That's not necessarily a problem. It just means that, in terms of looking at sidewalk and things like that, it's just a different context. So what we can see is downtown, some of the bridges performed better than others, but overall there's some patterns that sort of emerge. So when you look at it from kind of a step back, you can kind of see some routes that look better than others and how they perform. So we were cognizant of the fact that this is just higher level analysis. So we wanted to dive deeper into the numbers. And in doing that, we needed to really narrow down the different options that we were going to look at. So what we ended up doing is kind of going with what we already know. We already know where the pulse is today. And we already know that Chamberlain Avenue, Chamberlain Road, from Azalea down was probably going to be one of the best options. Also doesn't really have any competitors, of course, but it gives us some place to start kind of put the anchor down and really start looking at how those routes roll out from there. So there are two questions we had to answer. The first question is, how do we get through downtown? So we identified 3 routes through downtown. These are dashed lines because they do not follow specific routes right now. We'll get into more about the detail. But the idea is that you can look at these and see this one's sort of on the western side of the city, this one's sort of on the eastern side of the city, and then there's trade-offs that you get there. So in other words, if you go on the western side, you hit DCU, you hit DUU, and then you may not go downtown. So you had that trade-off, that connection. Whereas on the east side, the one that's in red right here, you are definitely going kind of on the north side of downtown and then down on, excuse me, I'm gonna take this. So the next question then, looks like it's go up there, is where does this stop on the south side? We have 3 corridors that we're looking at. All of the corridors have some strengths, all of them have some weaknesses. What we ended up kind of finding out through stakeholder work and working with the public is that everyone kind of wanted us to look at all the corridors. They didn't want us to kind of cancel anything out right now. So we did move forward with 3 different corridors. We did shrink the amounts, the distance in the corridors that they didn't go as far as 288 on Hull Street and the Midlothian Turnpike. But what you basically got to see is that at the end of the day, at this particular intersection right here, which is Commerce and Hull Street, you end up finding that you have all the buses, all the routes, potential routes, converge on that one particular corridor. So what this does is allows us to look at downtown options and then look at the south side options and basically put together kind of a matrix of the different route potential or potential routes. And so we ended up with 9 total alternatives, so 3 times 3. So we moved 3 alternatives for analysis. And this analysis was far more quantitative than that first level. It was much more data heavy, and we looked at the same types of things, but we looked in much greater detail about how a potential route would affect those things and how it would respond to conditions in the corridor today and in the future. So just summarizing kind of what we looked at. The first one we looked at is land use, and demographics plays a little bit of a role in this as well. But we wanted to see what does the city and what do the counties have in store for those corridors in the future. So obviously this isn't the current zoning. We're looking at 10, 15 years down the road. Are we looking at higher density development? Are we looking at mixed use, commercial, residential? We want to see that there's some support from a land use perspective for BRT corridors. We also looked at the number of parcels that you'd be working at. The more parcels in a corridor that you have to work with, the harder it is to redevelop it for a larger thing. So you want to look to see, there's a delicate balance there, obviously, but you want to see some corridors where there may be larger parcels of redevelopment. Property values and then watershed coverage or other options or other metrics that played into this. And we wanted to see kind of where redevelopment would happen based on a number of different options. We also want to see, kind of neighborhoods that we'll be going through, making sure that we're being more equitable and providing more access to everyone through this process. We don't just, it's a fine line. We want to make sure you're kind of, keeping on that line, but you have to look kind of both sides of that. And the analysis does give you some indications both ways of what might happen. On the other end, we looked at job access and multimodal criteria. So this is a lot more about how many jobs or new jobs do people access within a 60-minute drive or 60-minute bus ride? Excuse me. So we want to see like if people, can only get to say 25% of jobs today. If this BRT were in place, whatever that route may be, how many more jobs are accessible to residents on that corridor? We looked at sidewalk conditions and sidewalk density. It's easier to obviously to fix sidewalks than build them. So there's each one has a different sort of meaning in terms of what we're analyzing. And then we looked at bicycle facilities and then pedestrian volumes, where people walking today. And we wanted to kind of get an idea of the numbers that we're looking at now in the current times. Are they actually true, or what kind of ground truth those based on activity that's being measured by people's cell phone activity, their cell phone data? So this scoring, one thing to note is that the numbers themselves don't necessarily mean anything. They will have this relative values. But the idea is that we broke down all of the metrics that we use into these 5 different categories: development, the job access, and based on public feedback we receive, stakeholder feedback received, kind of best practices, things like that. We assigned some weights to those scores. So the numbers in blue on the left-hand side here are the highest possible score that a quarter could receive based on that metric. So if you look out, like I mentioned, there were 3 options downtown and 3 options on the south side. Those are all color-coded along the x-axis here. But what you can kind of see is that the ones that tended to fare better, there were some they tended to line up a little bit more. So you see some patterns here, but so what we wanted to do is add them up. That's not the most, that's the detailed way of doing it, but what it does is it gives us an idea of what the numbers are telling us. So what they did tell us is that on the south side, the Midlothian Turnpike was one of the, in terms of, especially with job access and multimodal, but also on development potential, it was kind of a clear winner. But in downtown, we had a little bit of kind of a tie, so to speak, between the eastern route through downtown and the western route. Well, that's a big difference because it's basically on 2 different sides of the study area, and you have significant trade-offs there. So on the east side, if you take the bus, you could take BRT directly from, say, Azalea to VCU, then you'd have to transfer to get to, say, downtown. Whereas on the west side, or excuse me, on the west side, you do that. On the east side, you have to make that transfer to VCU. So there are trade-offs there. And so we were kind of cognizant of moving forward with 2 alternatives that were not direct opposites, but they told very different stories. So what we did is we wanted to look a little bit at kind of other considerations, and one of the things that played a role in this was GRTC's program alternatives. So especially if you look on the south side and north side, there are service expansions already planned for that Midlothian quarter and the Azalea quarter. So we had a pretty good mashup there. Then we want to look at the stakeholder input that we received. There's some more water. The stakeholder input that we received during not only our public meetings, but the work that GRTC did with pop-ups and kind of meeting riders where they were at the transfer centers and things like that. We wanted to talk and kind of see what are, the people that actually ride the system, what would benefit them the most. What are the kind of things they like? So it's not just as important to tell us the Midlothian Turnpike looks the best. They're telling us that maybe job access might be the most important. What that tells us then is that job access to the Midlothian Turnpike, they tend to equal, so to speak, because that's scoring. So we used a lot of that to kind of give us an idea. And what we found out, especially with downtown, is that access to the VCU Medical Center, the MCD campus, transfer center, the current transfer center downtown, and then those downtown jobs, especially around the state capitol complex, were very important, and people are willing to make a trade-off and then maybe go to VCU on the existing poles. So it's very important to keep in mind that that trade-off is not necessarily, it gives you an extra ride, but it's still a pretty indirect connection that they can still use, and they're still remaining on the BRT. But what we want to do is have people understand that it's 1 ride versus 2 rides, and that does make a difference in kind of how you see this. So all of this kind of leads us to the locally preferred alternative. A locally preferred alternative is basically what GRTC would like to move forward with, based on the work that we've done, to further project development. That's where when I said earlier that this is just the first step in the process. There are additional steps, we'll go over them in just a second. But what we're recommending here is just where GRTC would just look more in the future. So what we are moving forward with is the downtown east plus the Midlothian Turnpike alternative. That takes you from Chamberlain Avenue up near Azalea through downtown on the sort of eastern side of downtown. That would be sort of around with, you know, the downtown, like the State Capitol Complex and the MCD campus, like I mentioned, and across the river at Manchester Bridge. And from there, it would head out Hull Street Road, up the boulevard just outside our door right here, down to the Midlothian Turnpike. So we have this route kind of this option. Now, this is not turn by turn. We're not, right now, we are not saying it would turn on Hull Street, it would turn here, it would stop here. We're not doing any of that right yet. What we're doing is looking at just the corridor so we can move forward with that more detailed environmental approach. And then when we look out towards Midlothian and Chesterfield County, we have a lot of things that we also want to look at. Where is the bus going to stop in the first phase? Where would the next stop be in additional phases? We also want to look at the ridership on that 1A extension that's going online next year and see kind of how ridership is responding on that route. And then that gives us a good opportunity to reflect on this potential service in the future. So any questions on the locally preferred alternative and sort of what that means?
You look at, for instance, out at Meadowville Technology Park, we're going to have multiple opportunities for jobs that aren't on there because the bus route doesn't go there. But we're working to get a connector, put those businesses to all those jobs. So coming from Route 1 may actually have significant more jobs than you're showing on that chart versus the Turnpike. And I'm not saying that one's right or wrong, just asking if you had that information to take into consideration.
Yeah, so we did, and I'll get into a little bit about Midlothian Turnpike and sort of there's some unique qualities about what we did on the analysis. Midlothian Turnpike just still had an extra push with the job access numbers. That doesn't mean Route 1's off the table. It just means that this particular project we're looking at, we'll probably look at Midlothian Turnpike first. So one of the things that we're doing through this project is making recommendations for the other corridors that we didn't work with. And, you know, the additional service that's already on Route 1, you know, this improves that job access because basically it allows people to take the bus up, catch it at that whatever stop may be right there at that intersection of Hull, and then access jobs on Hull Street. So people that live on Hull Street are doing the vice versa. So it does improve job access, even though it's not necessarily in that corridor.
Well, we pretty much will have a route running in both those
Right.
directions anyways, at least as on 60, right, the new route that we're doing.
The goal is that like just the BRT on that corridor certainly helps ridership in that corridor, but that BRT also improves the rest of the system through giving people easier transfers, better options for those connections that don't.
I just wanted to make
No,
sure you
absolutely.
had taken.
Great question. And moving forward. So want to talk about next steps. As I said, this is the first step in a larger process. But what we're doing, we're where that yellow star is. We're at the tail end of that first block where we're looking at the planning and getting the LPA. The next step is project development. At the end of that process, we will have, the NEPA analysis done through that's a federally designated process that we would follow. That's where we look at very specific stuff in the corridor. We look at the right of way, we look at traffic volumes, intersections, stoplight, at all the different details and the engineering that would go into putting this on the ground is what we would look at that step. And at the end of the day, or into that process, we'll have a 30% design that we move forward with project design. And then at that point, we start talking about funding. We'll have a better idea of how much this costs. And then we start moving towards construction. That's the idea. That's how kind of this works. So one of the important elements to kind of keep in mind is that right now, we don't really have a great idea where stations might go. We don't have a really good idea where the bus is going to go downtown. We know approximately kind of what corridors We know that there's a limited number of options, but we need to do a little bit more work to see what works best downtown, where it should stop on the Living Turnpike, things like that. And then finally, as I mentioned, we want to keep monitoring that 1A extension through Chesterfield. That's a significant additional bus service GRTC is providing out there. That is a big step. That gives us a lot of information on sort of how BRT might perform in the future. And we also use that for the modeling for ridership, in the future, in the next steps. So we have a lot more data that we need to get, we don't have right now, that we'll be getting in as well as we move through this process. And I'm not promising 2031. If that is So one of the things I wanted to bring up is talk about Midlothian Turnpike, since it's a very significant kind of push into the county. We wanted to make sure that those numbers that we got for the job access that tended to be so much better, especially than the other two options on South Side. We wanted to see kind of why that was. One of the things to keep in mind, of course, is that this route, this option on the Midlothian Turnpike, that we looked at is significantly longer than the other ones on US 1 and on US 360. So did that come into play? So what we did is we took 6 different alternatives and we sort of shortened the possible terminus for a route on BRT. We started at Southside Plaza and moving westward, we take different kind of logical places where you would want service maybe to stop. So one of the examples here is Robius Road. That was one of the places where you're Coconut Crossing, where you would see maybe service stopping and turning around. So we get all the way out to Walmart Way, and the reason we pick Walmart Way, which is the bottom of the hill there, past the town center, the reason we pick that is because that's where the 1A will go in the future. So we have a template already there for service that we can follow, and it doesn't cost us necessarily anything to look further down the road. It's all part of the analysis, but we want to make sure that we're not missing something that in the future might come into play, be important. So when doing this analysis, these numbers, the shape makes much more, the shape means more than the numbers themselves, I would say. But what you see is that as you move westward, so east to west, bottom to top here, and then on this chart right here, going from left to right, job access improves dramatically the further you go west, because there are just more jobs as you move forward. And so it just opens that up a little bit more. So these different lines represent different populations that we look at. So for example, this first line here are federally designated areas of persistent poverty. The next one down is the Justice 40 census tract, and so on. So we looked at different segments of population. So what we found is that as you move forward, or excuse me, as you move westward, without fail, each stop or each potential stop gives you more job access. And increasingly so. It's not necessarily exponential, but it's certainly dramatic increases in job access until you get roughly to Robius Road, Coconut Crossing. So that doesn't mean it stops getting better. You're wasting effort if you go beyond that. It just means that getting to Robius Road tends to be kind of this data gives us an indication that getting to Robius Road is an important piece of kind of that phasing. This is information that we would use in that next phase. We would, in the next step of this process, is we would look and see kind of, GRTC's goals, Chesterfield's goals, and so forth. How do they match up with sort of what we're seeing here geographically on moving this route forward? And as you can see, like I said, once you get to Robius, the returns diminish a little bit. There's still returns, they're still positive, but there is definitely a trend. So that was a lot of information, I know, and for the last almost a year of work, but I have time for questions. So
Questions, colleagues? Thank you. Detail, very detailed. Appreciate it. Anybody have a question?
I don't mind taking a stab at a few, Mr. Chairman, if I may. One, I would concur. That's an amazing level of detail, and the diminishing return chart is my favorite as it reaches jobs. And I love the detail that it went into with regard to Midlothian Turnpike. I will leave all the decision making on that part to my friends, I think, in Chesterfield, much like our partners in Richmond should really determine if they want to go up past VCU and Union or the other way, I think. Only thing I'm from Enrico, so I'll speak to that point if I may. If possible, you said it doesn't cost us anything to plan for the future now. And I do want to say that on the northern part, if you go to the map where you're showing it to Azalea, I would ask if we can please plan for the job piece study to Perham Road, where Green City is going to be. We know it's coming, and it's coming in the next 3 years. And then if you can plan it to VCC, I'm not saying we act, don't let me scare you. I'm not saying we activate that, but I think we'd like to know what that future planning is. And I'll tell you why. Go to the year chart where you said you're not promising 31. I just want to be clear that if and when Green City becomes to be phased in, we're looking at 27. And I don't want to be behind. So any planning that can be done now on the northern part, much like we just saw in the, I think it's the study on the Midlothian corridor is outstanding. How you phased it out for planning for future. And I'd asked to see that to Perham and then to Virginia Center Commons, just so we would know for future. And we don't have to come back in 2 years and try to do it again. We're already in this process. And that's what I would ask. The VCC thing is going to open next month and could draw hundreds of thousands of people starting this November 1st. So we're already there. And I don't want to be behind on the Perham Road connector to get people to jobs. St. Joseph's Villa is right there. A lot of jobs up Route 1. So that's all I would ask, Mr. Chair. While we're here, we can consider that.
Sir, whoever needs to hear that is here.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
All right,
So-
who else? Yes.
I agree. I think these are a great outcome of good engagement. I know we're only in the first phase, and the first phase is a lot more work to go. One thing I've said, I think, in previous meetings that we've had about this conversation is that while we were picking the first route, we're probably going to pick all three at some point, where it's going to go down Hull Street, it's going to go down Richmond Highway, and we're going to see the development and expansion of what transit-oriented development can show as change for our region. But more importantly, I think the south of Richmond, where we are right now, having plans for infrastructure to support multimodal transportation, shared use paths, Fall Line Trail, we have a lot of opportunities where we're going to see some really good connectivity that's going to drive development. And what you see today, the potential we have, isn't going to be what we see in 20 years. And I think that there's a potential where this route that we pick, how we respond to that, not only as a region, but as a city too, will be very important for its success. More importantly, it's accessibility. One thing that I've seen that is a potential future development that I will bring with CEO Saunders in the future will be Lombardy. Lombardy could be a connector between Broad Street East and West, as well as BUU, and all the way up to where that could come down Chamberlain. And that street could become an incredible thoroughfare between those areas, and it's right to campus, and it's really elevating the ability of accessibility on multiple fronts. And those are just some of the benefits that this route and selection of this can do for us. More importantly, that can expand to other options across the region as well. Just wanted to paint that picture because I think there's some opportunities where this plan activates things we haven't seen as potential before. And more importantly, those are neighborhoods. It's going to be giving access to Carver neighborhood. It's going to be giving access to BUU, an anchor in our community, a better transit access for their students, to the region and jobs as well. And I think that's what this is all about. So for me, I look forward to carrying this conversation through the next 4 phases and hopefully get that star sooner than 29, but we'll see.
Can you go back to the map where you did the projections for jobs? That's right, yes. So I guess my question, I want to know where you're starting. Are you starting at Chamberlain
So
here and going out west, or are you?
this starts at
Yes.
Southside Plaza.
Okay,
So we look at just the Midlothian Turnpike corridor and sort of where the natural or the logical.
so
potential stops would be.
do we have projections of jobs coming back? Going off?
So what this tells us is just
Out
the
to
number
Chamber?
of jobs that are available regardless on the route within 60 minutes. So it's not necessarily specific to the south side. This could someone that lives near Rodius Road, this provide them job access to Northside within 60 minutes. So these are specific to the south side. It's just that where that stop and where that is opens up more jobs throughout the region. Does that make sense?
Compared to access that's there already?
Yeah, compared to access that's there already. So today, if I lived at Robius Road, the number of, I'm just making numbers up, but the idea is that within 60-minute plus commute, my number of job access is 0 because there's no bus access right there now. In the future, if it goes up, now it just depends on kind of how you're measuring the population, but anyway, it goes up a certain amount. If it just goes out the south side, it doesn't help me living at Robius Road. The idea is that every progression moving westward, that additional mileage of BRT opens up certain more jobs, or a certain number of more jobs that wouldn't be available throughout the region. That includes Azalea, that includes elsewhere on the local bus service. It's a time thing, not necessarily a geography thing, if that makes sense. It's like, where can I go in 60 minutes? What jobs can I get to?
Any other questions?
Sure. When I look at this closer, I know that there were buckets of information that you were chasing, jobs, land use, those types of things. And this is sort of the bellwether for the highest ranking. I think it's 40 on the scale, right? So this is one of the components we're looking at. Did you or will there be a future plan on, let's say, land use density? Because this says where the jobs might be, but another chart like this might say where the potential ridership is to go places. Do you add that in? Do you fold that in?
Yeah,
or
you can. So we look at land use, we look at things like multimodal access and other measurements. The differences weren't as stark as they are with job access. That's the big thing. There are different things. The further west you go, the less infrastructure you may have. But the changes weren't so significant that it changed the score. So this just basically told us if we took out, or if we made the Lisbon alternative as short as the whole street, going out the term, but what would the difference be? Basically, job access is very much occurs. So, but yes, like US 1, their multimodal, US 1 multimodal score was very high throughout the corridor. When looking further towards the Central Town Center, obviously it changes. It just didn't change enough to kind of deal with this way. It doesn't mean it doesn't change it, it just means that combination of everything else was washed out a little bit. But job access, this particular thing, is where it really made the biggest difference. But to your point, that can all, yes, that's kind of what we've done.
But you had indicated in our previous development meeting that this has been looked at from a comprehensive plan standpoint from the jurisdictions. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
Knowing that it was based on the balance of where
Yes.
Very good people. There's a vote that needs to take place. Now, what are we actually?
Okay, so the recommendation is that the board of directors concur with the recommended corridor alignment to move into phase 2 study.
So
Yeah.
I'd be glad to make that mission. That corridor study is the Midlothian corridor and then an A or a B plan for Richmond? Is it west or east or how?
Unless any of my colleagues.
It's west.
Recommendation, further study.
Yeah.
It's Manchester.
This is the first phase with whatever questions, discussion been lifted up. I would assume they'll be incorporated into conversations in the next stage, right?
Correct, but I would say that an alteration.
But is it east or west in Richmond?
Oh, sorry, it's
East.
east. So somewhere between Belvedere and like Main Street.
I think we can make a motion.
Yes, sir, I did.
Second.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passed. Thank you for your work.
Yes.
Team. Thank you. So we're moving, all right? Cheryl is gonna give us an update on collective bargaining and open session. Okay.
Last month I couldn't. So, some of you are aware, we entered into contract negotiations with our local union, ATU 1220. I am happy to say that those negotiations were completed in 2 days.
Wow.
So, yes, 2 days. Day one was spent, of course, on contract language, and one of the things that we were able to achieve doing that is we're able to increase the percentage of part-time operators. Staff, of course, wanted 15%, but we settled on 13%, but it's still a win. We'll take that. It's currently 12%. Part-timers are very important to us maintaining our route, so we were happy with that. So it's just one of many different things, but the economics were spent on, day two was spent on economics, which of course impacts the budget. And the biggest economic impact was pay raises. So we settled on an 8.5% increase for year one and 3.5% for year two. Which we're happy with. Is absolutely within our budget, FY24 budget that we presented to the board. And the other increase was regarding insurance, life insurance. We currently get $50,000 of life insurance paid by the company, increase that to $60,000. And an increase in their weekly short-term disability pay from 400. So those are the biggest economic impacts. Total cost is approximately 4.7 million for the fiscal year. For this fiscal year, which for the outlining is approximately 900 additional for each year, 5%.
Two quick, easy ones just for John, just a quick nod or an approval. You're comfortable? Our finance committee meetings, we've talked about a lot of details, but you're comfortable. Sir, thank you. And Cheryl, can you please tell me what the 1% means? Is it, did I do the math right? Is it 3 equivalent positions for the 1% on?
Yes.
Is it 3? Did I multiply right? What is the 1% equal?
It's 1% of how many
Total.
operators we currently have. It's not the total. We try to get to the budgeted amount, but they wouldn't. So it's whatever we have. So for example, we have 250 operators.
That's currently. What we have currently.
Yes.
What we have currently.
Currently at 280.
280. So 1% is another 2.8
Yes.
equivalents. So another 3 part-timers.
Yes.
And we're currently maxed out at that percentage now, right?
Yes, we currently are. But one thing we did agree to is once we hire the part-timers, even if a number of full-time operators went down, we would not lay off.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you.
So I have
So-
a recommendation that the board of directors authorizes the CEO to sign a collective bargaining agreement between GRTC and ATU Local 1220 for the period October 1st, 2023 through September 30th.
Any more questions? All right, well, that's a recommendation made by the CEO on the floor. Get a motion.
So moved.
All right, moved by Council Robinson. Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Again, tremendous representation. But really, when we started, one of my biggest concerns staff relationship. And they allow this type of detailed work in 2 days. It's incredible. And it seems like both of us can walk away feeling like.
If I may, they ratified, they voted on it. It was
98%.
Yes.
That's crazy. All right, well, do you have anything else to add?
The only other thing I would like to add is introduce Stephen Marks, who is our new Chief Development Officer, who comes to us with a wealth of planning and development experience, and he will be taking over so Adrian can focus on Chief of Staff and not all the other projects. So we are excited to have him here.
Looking forward. By way of business, we do, I think Cheryl and Joe reminded me that we need to put together a nominating committee. Seems like a quick year, but a year is over. And we do need to reappoint officers and come up with a new strategy. So here's the thing though. Well, let me tell you. I would like for us to come up with a nominating committee, one person from each jurisdiction, and we name a chair. Joe gets with the chair, and we make some phone calls and see if we can come up with something by 24. Either you can keep your current officers or you can come up with new ones. Keep your current committee chairs or come up with new ones. Nominating committee will bring forward a recommendation of 24. Do we have anybody? These three jurisdictions who would step up?
I have a question. Joe, do you recall, where's Joe?
It's back here.
Do you recall who the nominating committee was last time around?
I think everybody rolled off. Was that right?
You don't remember? Like I did, I don't remember.
Well, I do have a question. Is there anybody that's currently serving in a role that doesn't want to continue serving? That's all I need to know. I'm pretty sure that'll be a quick,
Maybe we don't need a committee.
Well, I think we have to have a committee.
You do, that's fine, but,
So that may have just been a committee meeting.
did it again.
So Todd for him right there. Lincoln for Richmond. R for Chester. One from each.
She gets that a lot.
It's already done. Just call it.
Todd for R.
Yep.
Joe will reach out to you. So we need on 24.
24, yes.
All right, any other business?